Okay, good afternoon and welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our Poverty Trends Session 5 webinar, The Changing Structure of the U.S. Economy and How It Shapes Your Local One. My name is Hyacinth McKinley. I am the Program Associate here at the Learning Communities Resource Center. I'm also joined today by my colleague Liza Forrest, who's just off camera. She's going to be helping us troubleshoot any technical issues, as you might have heard, one that we just got started with. But we're going to ask that you please be sure to mute yourself during this presentation so we don't get any feedback, and we're actually going to have time for you guys to ask all of your many questions, I'm sure, for our wonderful presenters at the close of their presentation. So if you do have any questions, we're going to ask that you send them in to us through the Q&A box. And again, we'll have time to raise those at the end. If you have any technical issues, such as accessing the audio or any issues with your video, with your visual feed, please send that in through the chat box to Hyacinth McKinley, and we will get you guys sorted out. So. The purpose of the learning community is to analyze community action outcomes and identify effective, promising, and innovative practice models that alleviate the causes and conditions of poverty. We have a great presentation here for you today that is going to do just that for you guys, so we're very excited. And this is critical for us because as community action agencies, anti-poverty work is at the heart of what we do, and it's really who we are. And we always like to share this little quote from Jeannie Chapman that we really think puts the work that we're doing and the convenings that we have here online in context. It's critical to remember that as a network, she says, we must be focused on the right issues to address poverty today. We must be in tune with issues and reflect on and create strategies that have impact. And as such, we always like to kick off our events by reciting the promise of community action. Liza, if you want to read along with me. Community action changes people's lives.
Changes people's lives and embodies the spirit of hope.
Communities and makes America a better place to live.
A better place to live.
We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. And I heard Jim chiming in there, too, so that's great. I always love our presenter participation. So, again, to reiterate, our national webinar series events are really focused on these specific innovative anti-poverty approaches, and we use these as a way to showcase these strategies that are going on in our closed groups, but we like to use this to communicate what's going on out to the broader CSBG network. And if you are attending this webinar today, it is highly likely that you are joining us because you are interested in participating in our new affinity group that this webinar is actually the kickoff event for. We are very excited to have the Poverty Trends LCG to offer a new affinity group that is specifically going to focus in on the causes and conditions of poverty. It's going to provide you with access to resources and I think particular TNA from our subject matter experts on how you can use the information that's available and apply it specifically to your community. So we are very excited to be launching this effort today in collaboration with the Center for Community Futures. And if you haven't signed up yet, I highly encourage you to click on the link that's on your screen. That'll take you to the application form, and if you fill that out, we're very excited to have you participate in this group. And we very much are looking forward to the ideas and progress that's going to be shared as a result of this affinity group. So please do check that out. Our agenda for today, we've already done the welcome and introductions and the technology overview. So we're going to skip ahead, but your role, for those of you who are interested in participating in this affinity group, you're going to be asked to participate in regular web meetings. The application window is going to be open through the end of January, I believe. Your assignments for participating in this group are obviously convening regularly via WebEx and other online platforms. There are going to be readings and homework assignments that are going to be shared from our subject matter experts. You're going to be expected to provide feedback and input on the progress and challenges that you're having at your site. Of course, we want you guys to be actively involved. That is a key critical piece in this work. It's not just enough for us to share the resources, but we're really going to ask you guys, if you're participating, to be highly engaged in the work that's going on. And it's important to share what you learn. There's going to be a wide array of platforms and different ways for you guys to do that, so we're very excited to hear your voice on those things. And of course, offer suggestions not only for this group and this cohort, but for the network at large. So we're very excited to have you all participate in this and to hear your thoughts and suggestions. One quick thing that I forgot to mention earlier is that the recording to this webinar event and the slide deck that's presented will be made available within 2 to 3 business days after this event, and you can find that on the Learning Communities page on the Partnership's main website. With that, I am very excited to turn it over into the hands of our more than capable presenters for today, Jim Masters and Alan Stansberry from the Center for Community Futures. Alan, you're on.
First and foremost, I want to let the 60-plus participants who have already joined us, now I see it's over 70, we appreciate you all tuning in, and we will have a very informative and content-packed presentation for you. It's almost 60 slides, graphics, and a lot of statistical information. Our topics, we have 2 slides that cover our topics: jobs lost to technology, jobs sent overseas, globalization, men who have dropped out of the workforce, 10 million nationally, people working full-time but are still below the poverty line, people working part-time who like to work full-time, people in jobs with no benefits or retirement plan, almost half the people being hired in the last 10 years are on contract instead of permanently hired, people in temporary jobs. Going to the next slide. College graduates have gotten over 90% of the jobs since 2009. People with high school diplomas or less had a net decrease of almost 1 million jobs. Wage trends for men are down. Wages have failed to keep up with inflation for the last 30 years. Business practices and government policies that permit, encourage, or even require restructuring of this economy. We'll talk about family formation and family structure issues that are related to work opportunities. Something new that we have never covered before in our previous webinars and workshops is the prevalence of drug and alcohol addiction in America and its impact on society and economy, and how these shape your local economy, jobs formation, and poverty, and where to find data resources. And on that last note, where to find the data resources, at the bottom of each of our slides is we give you a graphic or some sort of statistical information. I have attempted to place at the bottom the web link to where you can find that information and how you can drill down to your own local community to find out more specifically about how these impact your location. Going on to the next slide.
Let me pick up on that a minute, Alan. What Alan is describing here is the process that we're going to use in this affinity group, where we're going to put out a series of one-pagers, where today is sort of an overview of some of the topics that we're talking about on a national level. And what we're going to do is put out a series of one-pagers that help you drill down and find out in your local area, for example, how many people are working part-time but would like to be working full-time, how many jobs have recently been lost to automation, to globalization, et cetera. We think that this information is highly relevant in today's political environment because many people who feel like they are no longer able to make it in America are reaching out for radical solutions through the political process and voting for candidates that are making big promises that are going to be extremely difficult to keep. But by obtaining much finer grained information about the characteristics of the local labor market, we hope to arm you with facts that you can use for working on these trends in the local area. As Alan and I have said in previous webinars, there's a huge amount of information available about national trends. But exactly how does this apply in your local area? That's what we want this affinity group to work on, to take the data sources that we provide and to look through your state agencies, your local nonprofits, your economic development organizations, in particular your universities, the University Extension Division, and pull together information on each of these characteristics of the labor market that gives you a much finer grained picture about what's happening in your area. Okay, back to you, Alan.
Okay, I'm going to quickly summarize everything in the slides in this one slide that gives a snapshot of the U.S. economy in trillions. First and foremost, a household net worth is estimated to be $80 trillion plus. You know, that varies from year to year, and it certainly is on the increase since our global recession of 2007-2009. The U.S. GNP is $16.8 trillion. Our excess reserves and overseas deposits is $4.18 trillion. And the sales of the top U.S. retailers are $1.5 trillion. Now, the drag on the economy is that $15 trillion or so in current U.S. household debt, $8.4 trillion in mortgage debt, and here's the big one, $1.2 trillion in student loan debt, credit card debt, not quite $900 billion, auto loan debt, almost $1 trillion. And these are, so to speak, drivers of our economy, the debt that we have. Going on to the next slide, if I can get it here. Okay, let me just show you the distribution of our U.S. economy. As you can see, the biggest chunk of it is personal consumption, 67%. Government expenditures, 18%. Investment is 15%. The capitalists running our Congress and many parts of our administration insist that investment is the driver of our economy, and which is why they are able and successfully able to keep their taxes down, when in fact it's quite the reverse. It's personal consumption that is actually running this economy and has been for quite some time. Going on to the next slide here, I think this one is for you, Jim. This is
right. The number one driver of the decline in wages and in jobs going overseas, et cetera, is essentially technology, automation. You think about bank tellers and gas station attendants being reduced due to technology. This phenomena is happening in all of society. Now, you think about many public policies or many scientific experiments. They've got good things that they do. That's one. That's why we do them. On the other hand, they produce some negative effects as well. They all have opportunity costs. If you're doing this, you can't be doing that. They all have limits. They only go so far in what they do that's good, and then they start running out of steam. And they all have unintended consequences. The squirrels that jump out of the tree 3 years later and land on your head that nobody saw coming. So when you look at technology, yes, technology makes business processes faster, better, cheaper. It can lower the price to consumers, but technology also eats jobs. And if you look at the continuing trend of automation, now we're talking about automating truck drivers, we're talking about automating taxi drivers, et cetera, et cetera. This is something that most governments worldwide, and certainly the political parties in the U.S., do not have a handle on how to respond to this and what to do when jobs are lost to technology or to its cousin, first cousin, globalization. So when we look at the effect of automation on job reduction, we're looking at a trend line here where the number of good jobs, be they in manufacturing, finance, or other locations, is going to continue to decrease as a percentage of the workforce population. The Gallup Association that does the surveys just put out an interesting report. They said there are about 1.2 billion good jobs worldwide. There are about 3 billion people competing for these jobs worldwide now, and in 20 years there will be only 800 million of these good jobs worldwide, and the world population is going to increase by another 2 billion people. So the trend line here, as far as jobs lost to technology, is not a positive one. As I say, there are no effective public policy responses to this as yet. But it's something that we want to try to get a much better handle on just in terms of our understanding of it. Okay, let's look at the next slide.
Well, before you go to that, I just want to call attention to the graphic, which is from actually created from Ball State University. Their research on the impact of automation and technology. It starts off with 320,000 industrial robots sold in the last 2 years. And the impact on that has been mostly on services, almost 80%, 19% on factory jobs, and the remaining 1.2% on agriculture. I just wanted to call that to your attention. Moving on to the next slide. Again, information from Ball State University.
I don't have the button to move the slides.
I did move the slide. I have the button.
Okay, but I'm still showing U.S. jobs lost to technology.
Okay, I'll take it up. I'll pick it up. I hope everybody is getting the next slide here. That starts off, in the U.S., more jobs were lost to technology than trade. According to the report from Ball State University, the U.S. has lost 5 million factory jobs since 2000. And World Trade has claimed production jobs, in particular when China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. There was no downturn in the U.S. manufacturing output. Instead, the U.S. production has been growing over the last decades. From 2006 to 2013, manufacturing grew roughly by 17.6%, or 2.2% per year. The study reports that the trade accounted for 13% of the lost factory jobs, but 88% of the jobs were taken by robots and other factors at home. And these graphics show how that has panned out since 1947 to 2013. And
okay,
again,
Alan, I'm still on slide 15 here. Why hasn't WebEx moved the slide? What slide are you seeing on your screen?
I'm on 16, Jim.
Why am I only on 15?
I don't know.
What slide are you on? ISX, what slide are you on?
I am on slide 16, but we're getting it fixed on our end. Please stand by. Thank you.
I hope our participants are able to see slide 16.
Well, I'm signed on as a participant, and I'm on slide 50. Okay, there's slide 16. Okay, now I'm on slide 16, Alan.
Okay. I'll go on to 17. Let's see if 17, if you get 17.
Well, I go back to 16. If I'm on as a participant, then the other participants couldn't see 16 either. So go back and do 16 over again.
All right. Again,
okay,
this is information from Ball State University, the research that they've done in both technology, jobs lost in technology, and globalization. And their conclusion is that technology has been the biggest factor in losing jobs in the United States. And they're talking about here that 5 million factory jobs have been lost since year 2000. And then they talk about the fact that China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001, which allowed tariffs to be lowered, but there was no downturn in U.S. manufacturing output. Instead, production has been growing. And between 2006 and 2013, their research showed that it grew by almost 18%, or about 2.2% a year. And their study shows that the trade accounted for 13% of lost factory jobs, but 88% of the jobs were taken by robots and other factors at home.
Okay, so let me give you another example on this. 40 years ago, there were 900,000 coal miners in the U.S. Today, there are 65,000 coal miners producing about the same amount of tonnage of coal as 40 years ago. And why is it that there are 10% as many miners, or 8% as many miners as there used to be 40 years ago? Technology. Now, instead of digging a hole in the ground and having men crawl around in it, they chop the top off of a mountain and use a steam shovel the size of a house to scoop the coal out like you were scooping ice cream. Most coal used to be produced in the east through tunnel mining. Most coal in the U.S. now is mined in the west, Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, using this scoop it out of the ground technique. So automation alone has resulted in a drop in the number of coal miners from almost 900,000 to about 65,000. And again, they are producing the same amount of coal that they produced 40 years ago. Now, there's a decrease in demand for coal, gas is pricing coal out, et cetera, but we're talking here specifically about automation and its impact on employment. Okay, now let's go on to slide 17.
Okay.
So where the jobs going? The jobs are going down in terms of job growth by decade. We're seeing a long-term slide in terms of the number of jobs being created, and we see a lot of low-skill service jobs, working at the fast food counter, et cetera, and other jobs that are difficult to automate, such as home health care, experiencing increases. But the mid-skilled jobs are the ones that are disappearing, and as we'll see in Alan's chart later, that's having a dramatic effect on the middle class. Okay. Let's look at the future jobs. What Pew Research shows and people think that robots will be doing much of the work that are done by humans, but few workers, and this is ironic, few workers expect their jobs or professions to experience substantial impacts, a dramatic difference. There's a great joke that just went around that the factory of the future will have a man and a dog. The man's job is to feed the dog, and the dog's job is to make sure the man doesn't touch the machinery. So, Alan, you're not laughing.
I'm laughing.
Okay,
I'm laughing.
Anyhow, this trends in automation is something that we just need to develop a much better understanding of on an occupation by occupation basis. So let's go on to the next slide.
Okay, this is unemployment versus import trends. This is a graphic from Chicago University, their economics department, showing a ratio of imports GDP growth, that's the dotted line that's continuing up, and the unemployment rate, which is trending somewhat downward. And it kind of goes to say that, well, we have, fairly steady growth between 1970 and 2005, I should say, steady unemployment. The imports to GDP ratio has gone up substantially. So that kind of says that exports, imports are not having that much of a dramatic change in our employment situation. Going on to the next slide. This is from The Economist. This is just looking at jobs lost to international trade with China. Chinese imports into the United States, the growth has gone from 1990 from a few $100 million to today, 2015, 2016, of over $400 billion, or almost that. Meanwhile, our manufacturing employment has dropped from about 16%, 17%, down to maybe 12 or 13%, 1990 to 2015, same period.
So in numerical terms, this report by Autor and Dorn cited here, about 4 million jobs have gone directly from the U.S. to China due to manufacturing. Now, the great irony here is that almost all those jobs went before 2010, in that decade from 2000 to 2010. And so talking about the loss of jobs to China and manufacturing jobs was absolutely true historically. They're just now figuring it out. China is now losing those jobs to Myanmar, Vietnam, Thailand, and other even lower cost manufacturing areas. So when we talk about bringing the jobs back from China, China is losing some of those same jobs now to other parts of the world. So this is a much more complicated situation than a few headlines would have you believe. What's next, Alan? Part-time and unemployment. Okay. So this is a measure of slack in the labor market, if you will. And
call from Flexphone.
Hello?
I'm still here, Jim. I'm sorry about my phone here.
It's off now. Unplug it? Oh, thank you. Okay. So when we look at the number of people who are unemployed, that is a part of the picture. You've got 144 million people in America in the labor market. Half of them make less than $15 an hour. At any given point in time, you've got X percent of the total who are unemployed. So that number now is approximately 5%, let's say, just for discussion purposes. However, you also have about the same number who are working part-time and would like to be working full-time. You've got about 2 million temps, and then you've got the people that dropped out of the labor market completely, about who we're going to look at in much greater detail. But the point is, the unemployment rate in and of itself is a very incomplete picture about the structure of the job market in any given area. And we're going to try to help you develop some tools that do a much finer grained analysis of what kinds of jobs people are working in. We're going to look at the number of people working full-time who are still in poverty, et cetera. So the structure of the labor market, particularly for the bottom 60% of people who work, is a lot more complex than just an unemployment rate. When you look at the unemployment rate, let's say 5%. Then you see the headline: 200,000 jobs were created last month, and 125 were created the month before. Things are getting better. Well, you've got to have about 250,000 jobs created each month just to keep up with population growth, new graduates, et cetera, et cetera. So the fact that you've got an increase in the 125 to 200,000 is essentially irrelevant. It is still not keeping up with the number of people who are looking for work. And then we see the number of people who are working part-time, working temps, working 2 or 3 jobs, working full-time below the poverty rate, dropped out of the labor force, et cetera, et cetera. We want to get a full picture of all of these categories of workers, and that's part of what this affinity group is going to try to do over the next year, is develop the tools to give us a much better picture of what's going on. So the labor force participation rate, the number of people in the economy, a number of adults 25 to 54 who are employed went up in the 80s and the 90s and has been decreasing ever since. And it continues to trickle down. So let's look at the next slide in terms of more detail about the labor force participation rate. And we see people with a BA are working at about 94% of them are working. People with some college, about 88% of them are working. People with high school or less, down to about 84% of them are working. So the trend that Alan talked about earlier, with most of the jobs created since 2009 going to college graduates, is all, and people with high school or less continuing to lose ground, is a trend line that has continued. Okay. So then we see the downward trends here, and particular issues around prime age male. This is again 25 to 54 labor force participation, looking at the number of men and the year that they were born in terms of labor force participation. And interestingly enough, the younger men here, we're looking at the 63 to 72 period. So this number of men who are not working is somewhere in the 7 to 10 million men who seem to have disappeared from the labor force. John Buckstead and I had dinner last night, and we were speculating about where are these men and who are these men. John said he thinks a lot of them are military veterans who came back either with injuries or PTSD, unable to fit back into the labor force. Something of these 7 to 10 million men, and we'll try to get better numbers on this. One article I read said 48% of them have opioid prescriptions, typically for pain. Then you wonder how many of them have either military-related injuries or other medical conditions. How many of these men are actually represented in the increase in the number of people receiving permanent disability benefits, which has increased from about 3 million to 9 million people over the last 15 or 20 years. So we've got some of these missing men are over on permanent disability, and we're going to try to unravel this whole set of dynamics. Again, we're going to come up with national sources. We're going to suggest places you can look at the state and local level to try to fill out this description the characteristics of the workforce. So here we are again, men actively looking for work and this long, slow decline. Now, how much of this represents women taking jobs formerly occupied by men? Well, there's another interesting question. How much of this represents men who just give up because the factory closes, the steel mill moves overseas, et cetera? Well, that's another group of this. But our general assumption is that anybody who is able to work should be working, and the jobs that people work at should produce a good living for them. So that's sort of why we're showing you what happens when people aren't working, et cetera. Okay, Alan, you're going to talk about trade and commerce here. Oh, here we have the 7 million men not at work and some of the other reasons. The men who are out of work spend 4 to 5 hours a day playing video games or watching television. So maybe we should be paying people for playing video games. I don't know, and keeping up their mental situation. Here we have, another reason why you've got this substantial number of men out of the labor force is that many of them have prison records that make it difficult, if not impossible, to get jobs in the regular economy. So some of these men are probably working in the informal economy, whether construction, roofers, or other manual labor tasks for which they get paid off the books, if you will. So we're going to try to figure out how many men who have been released from prison are unable to find work and are part of this 7 million men who are no longer working. Okay. What's going on in trade and commerce, Alan?
Well, according to the U.S. Department of Commerce, which is, of course, they have a particular bias, they contend that there's over 11 million jobs, up from 1.6 million since 2009, that are supported by rising exports. They calculate that for every $1 billion of U.S. exports, it supports over 5,500 U.S. jobs. And I think this was their response to the politicians, particularly during the presidential race, those who wanted to get rid of our TPP or TTP trade treaties, and this was their response to that. And so that's this is their graphic showing where we've picked up jobs or when we've lost jobs, and most of the job loss was during 2009, as you can see by the graph. We've lost jobs in other periods like 2000, 2001, and that was during another recession that we had, the old dot-com recession, you may recall. Going on to the next slide, people working full-time but still below the poverty line. This is a graphic from the University of California, Davis, their Poverty Research Center. This is information that they glean from their from research. The majority of people who live below the poverty line do not work, but this includes children, elderly, and the disabled poor. Among the poor between ages 18 and 64 who are not disabled or in school, 51, almost 52% work for part of the previous year. And you see that that's underlined. That means it's a link directly to the information source. And it also goes on to say that 25% of those are able-bodied poor who work more than 50 weeks a year. And then there's a breakup of by ethnic minority and by education. Very useful graphic. Going on to the next slide. See if we can get this to work. Income trends. This really shows you where the upper income, the 95 percentile, their growth in earnings between 1967 and today has almost doubled from 117,000 annual income to over 214,000 annual income. Wouldn't we all like to be there? But only 5% of the entire U.S. population falls into that category. On the 50 percentile, the increase in wages have gone from 44,000 to 56,000. And if you're in the 20th percentile, your wages have only seen an increase from 18,000 to a little over $22,000 during that period of 67 to 2015. And again, this is
so when we talk about wage stagnation for the bottom half of the population, this is what we're talking about. Productivity has continued to increase dramatically from over this 40-year period. The gross domestic product going from, what, 3 or 4 trillion back in 67 up to 17 trillion in 2015. But wages have not kept track with that because the bulk of the increase has gone to upper income groups, to investors, and to managerial salaries. We've done previous webinars on that topic, and you can go back and look at our previous webinars in the partnerships archive of materials. And maybe Hyacinth, at the end of this, you could remind us how people can access that. But keep going on income trends, Alan.
Yeah, again, this is out of the U.S. Census that the New York Times published recently, and this shows the up and down, the volatility of the median household income. The highest was back in 1999, almost 58,000, and in 2015, 56,500. That's the highest we've seen in the last couple of years, last 10 years, since before the recession. And the poverty rate, as you can see, has been an up and down graphic here. The lowest being 11.3% just before the dot-com recession, and today it's estimated to be 13.5%. Going on to the next slide. This is income gains 1947 to 1979 versus from 1980 to 2009. In 47 to 79, government policies benefit the growing middle class. But in 1980, the government policies changed to benefit businesses and investors with loose business regulation, improved taxation, lower taxation for businesses and investors, and of course their fiscal policies. And it just shows you that how the gains were. Down at the bottom, the gains were only 122%, where at the top had a 99% increase, but the fourth 20% was 115%. And again, looking at the graphic, lopsided gains at the top, the bottom fifth lost, quite a bit, and the top bids gained quite a bit. That's just the difference in our government regulations, the tax policies, and the fiscal policies. And I'm afraid we're going to continue to see the same in the next 4 to 8 years with the new administration. I think that's what we're going to continue to see. Wage trends. This is from a study done at UC Berkeley with 2 prominent economists, Tom Piketty and Sej. This is off of the Economist magazine, showing trends in real American income, showing where the bottom 90% are, continuous losses, and then during the recovery, the top percent continue to receive more of the gains than the rest of the households. Going on to the next slide, wealth trends in the U.S. between 1913 and 2009. This is a Robert Reich graphic we borrowed from him. Shows a concentration of wealth. You can see it's like a suspension bridge, high at 2 ends. Back in the 20s, it was the highest, and then here we are in 2015, almost as high as it was back in the 20s. The major downturns were during the war, World War II, when things got equalized in income. And here's the growth of debt between women and the workforce. As women came into the workforce, debt of the average American went up. And you can see that in 2002, we're sitting at about 132% higher than it was, let's say, in the 60s. Substantial.
So let me talk a little bit. Yeah, let me talk a little bit more about that, Alan. When you look at the glory period of the middle class from 1945 to 1972 and maybe 1975, a man working, one person in the household working, was enough to keep that family out of poverty for the most part, white families out of poverty. And then as the cost of living continued going up, but wages began to stagnate in the 70s, several things started happening. One is men began working longer hours on average. Women began going into the workforce, and people began accumulating more debt in order to keep up with the Joneses. You know, so now the New York Times today said auto debt was $1.1 trillion, student debt $1.2 billion, et cetera, et cetera. Mortgage debt $9 or $10 trillion. So what's happened is that as families have tried to maintain their lifestyle, and to live what they consider a middle-class life, is that men and women, you know, 2 incomes in the household are necessary, and there's a substantial amount of debt. Alan and I have looked at this worrisome trend in some detail in previous webinars, and when you look at what's happened in terms of typical households, our feeling is that we've about hit the limit of what households can do by way of working additional hours or additional jobs and by way of taking on debt. And we think this is part of the reason that the anxiety is going up, that we've used up the available tools for maintaining a quality of life and a lifestyle. And those tools are increasingly under stress and not working as well as people had hoped, whether it's refinancing the home mortgage or borrowing for whatever purpose. Therefore, this anxiety about the future and feelings of stress have continued to go up. So let's look at the next slide in terms of the business practices that permit, encourage what's been happening in the economy. And this is over the last 30 years. And the big one is stagnating wages. Wage growth simply has not kept up with growth in the economy. It used to be that wages were about 40% of the distribution of increased productivity. Half of it went to the workers and ballpark, and half of it went to the owners and the managers. And starting in the 70s, there's this productivity kept going up and wage growth flattened out. Alan's got a great chart on that, a couple of them that we'll put into a future webinar. So what's happened to this increase in productivity, increase in profits that did not go to the workers? Well, it went to the investors and the managers, or the corporations are simply hoarding it overseas. There's a couple of $1 trillion overseas that has just been left over there, so they didn't have to pay taxes on it. There's been talk about, well, let's have a tax holiday and let them bring it home. Well, that was tried about, 15 years ago, Alan, 12 years ago, and they did bring a substantial amount of money home, but they did not share it with the workers or invest in research and development. They gave it to the investors and the managers. So starting in the 70s, you see corporate practices reducing pensions and from defined benefit pensions or defined contribution pensions to defined benefit. Whoa, what happened there? So, and you see corporations beginning to reduce their contribution to health care plans. The outsourcing and sending jobs overseas has continued, and this is a serious issue and one that the U.S. Corporations have taken advantage of and the government has not adequately dealt with. I'm not sure that you address this issue either through tariffs or bullying. This is a very complicated issue in terms of supply chain management and the reducing costs, et cetera. Most of the stuff that we buy cheaply at Walmart or Target is actually manufactured overseas, so it reduces our prices. But what we pay for that is reduced employment in the U.S. So this is a serious issue, but one that is not solved by magic wands. Corporations have put the desire for short-term profits ahead of keeping their workers and the society healthy. Henry Ford had this famous comment that he wanted to pay his workers enough to be able to buy one of his cars, and yet we've got many, many companies now that pay their workers insufficiently, really, to buy their own products. So let's go on to the next slide. Why did this jump to full screen on my screen, I wonder?
I did that, Jim.
Okay. You jumped 2 slides. Oh, here we go. Okay. So we've talked about automation. The good things about automation: faster, better, cheaper. Shift the responsibility for completing the transaction from an employee, a sales clerk, to the customer, whether it's a bank transaction or gasoline or buying a shirt. The shift of jobs to part-time from full-time so that employers can duck out of paying health care, et cetera, and the reduction in unionization. Unions held employers to higher standards in terms of pay, benefits, et cetera. In the absence of that countervailing power, employers are able to take jobs that were full-time and break them into part-time, and we've seen the challenges that come from people working 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., and then they send them home and bring them back to work 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. or something like that. Wage theft, Alan did some very interesting research on this. This is a much bigger issue than we think about, but there are numbers of people who work, particularly for day wages, who either don't get paid what they were promised or don't get paid at all, as a substantial issue. The Department of Labor has actually been doing some work on this in the last couple of years. The desire not to pay overtime, and we saw that the Department of Labor had recently increased the salary level at which people could receive overtime from about $22,000 to $44,000, and many employers have resisted this. Ironically, this is an issue in community action agencies as well. And then we have family structures now trying to accommodate to this shifting and complicated work situation, but without a paid family leave or paid child care from the employer. And this is one area where there may actually be some positive action out of the coming Congress. Alan and I are doing a workshop in January in Long Beach at the Partnerships Winter Conference, the MLTC, where we're going to look at what are the opportunities under the current Congress and the incoming administrations. And then you've got temp jobs replacing permanent positions. There's about 2 million temps in the U.S., most of them young, most of them minority. And this is another way that employers do not have to pay decent wages with benefits. So then we look at the unhappy things that businesses have been doing, and on the next slide, we're going to look at what government has been doing in response to all of these changes.
Jim, before we leave this slide, let me just talk a little bit about wage theft and how pronounced that has become. There are experts out there that says if we could just eliminate wage theft, we could bring back an enormous number of our American workers up to a $15 an hour wage or at least a sustainable wage because there's such a huge loss in this category. And part of that category includes what we call misclassification. That is a deliberate activity by employers to shift their permanent full-time employees to contract, when in fact it's very much against the regulations of the Labor Department. They have very specific requirements that the employer must meet before they can shift employees over to a contract. And then when you shift an employee to contract, that means they don't have to pay them overtime. They don't have to pay them any kind of benefits. That all has to come out of their salary, whatever they get on contract, which might be hourly or some other thing. And if I may go back to the previous slide just for a moment, down at the bottom where we talk about Henry Ford paid his workers to earn enough to buy his cars, now we have the big chain operations, specifically Walmart or many of the other large employers who are paying so little that the employees qualify for food stamps and other subsidies. And this makes a lot of the more conservative politicians quite upset, because that means that these full-time employees have to go out and utilize food stamps and other subsidies to make it from paycheck to paycheck. This annoys the conservatives because they are trying to cut back all of that and balance the budget. Anyway, so much for that.
So,
I'll go on to the next slide.
Okay, I'm going to just add there that the Ryan plan for anti-poverty calls for people receiving most public benefits, including SNAP, possibly Medicaid, to do some form of work in exchange for their receiving those benefits. So one irony here, as Alan points out, you've got a lot of full-time employees, both in the public and in the private sector and in the nonprofit sector, who are also receiving some form of public benefits, and they're already working full-time, and then there's going to be a work requirement for them to receive the benefit. I don't quite see how that is going to work, but we may unfortunately have an opportunity to test it. So when we look at government policies that permit, encourage, or even require restructuring of the economy, what's government been doing here? Well, they have not supported increases in the minimum wage. The minimum wage has not kept up with inflation for more than 30 years. In the 1960s, when I started at the Office of Economic Opportunity, a family that had one worker that got a job at the minimum wage moved out of poverty. Not by much, but just enough. In other words, a minimum wage with one earner used to support a family. Now, minimum wage with two earners will not support a family. So the federal level and the state level have also supported tax policies that enable income inequality to occur. Alan pointed out in a previous slide, income inequality was reduced in the Eisenhower administration, for example. The top rate on earners was 90%, and now we're looking at 39%, with a probable drop to 33%. So the income inequality is dealt with not so much in putting limits on what people earn, but on tax policies that take some of that additional income and use it for societal public purposes. So another failure at the governmental level is to provide adequate transition to workers who lost their jobs to automation and globalization. America and most other countries are still way behind on this. This crisis in global capitalism with increasing numbers of people not able to make a living is something that hopefully is going to precipitate some positive action in response to these mega trends in the world economy. And then we have many, many proposals that have simply failed, have been on the table for decades and are only just now getting some positive inclinations. Very interestingly, the idea of family leave or specifically maternity leave is now seems to be something that the incoming president-elect supports. We hope that that goes through. About half of workers do not get sick leave and paid sick leave. And so there were proposals that everybody should get 3 days or 2 weeks worth of paid sick leave. So then Alan has already talked about allowing companies to reclassify workers and make them contract. 50% of the 10 million people who have been hired since 2009 are hired on a 1099 basis instead of a W-2 basis, which means they're contractors. They have to provide their own tools. They get no benefits. And this is not just Uber drivers. This is a lot of other people as well. So this gig economy thing has got a few pluses in that it enables many workers to earn an extra, on an average, $9,000 per year, but it is not a living for the most part in the gig economy. So what's our next slide, Alan?
Well, before we leave that, let me give you an example of what we're talking about, reclassification of workers. There's a court case here in California, dealing with Federal Express. Believe it or not, you think a driver for Federal Express would not be a contract driver, but in fact, they were hired on contract. They had to buy their own truck. And of course, you know where they would have gotten that truck from is directly from Federal Express. Needless to say, they had to gas up and maintain that truck on their own dime. But the drivers went to court and they won. They got the California courts to overturn that misclassification, and now they're back on as permanent employees, receiving benefits as required by the state of California. And they no longer have to pay to maintain their trucks or purchase their trucks. These are all now maintained by Federal Express. And that's what I mean, the extreme of what these companies can go to reclassify workers and how it impacts our American workforce. Going on to the next slide is dealing with workers with access to medical and retirement benefits. This is as of 2012, and this is a study that was performed for the Bureau of Labor Statistics. 76% of workers in management profession and other related occupations have access to both retirement. But in 2009, 43% of service workers didn't have access. By March of 2012, that figure went from 43% to 49%. And these are various, to the side here are various graphics that showed in the different industries where people were not receiving medical or retirement or any other kinds of benefits. Going on to the next slide here, this is a graphic showing percent of full-time and part-time workers with access to combinations of medical and retirement benefits in the private industry. And you can see the biggest portion of this graphic for part-time is that they maybe 60% of the workers have no access to medical or retirement, and a minor amount, less than 20%, receive medical or retirement. And full-time is quite the reverse. Over almost 70% full-time have medical and retirement, and a small minority of about 15% have no medical or retirement. Just to kind of show you how this works. And going on to the next slide, if I can get to the button here. Okay, employees, workers with no benefits or retirement. This shows you those at different age categories, 65 or more older, which is on the far right, shows that it's a sizable percentage, 16%, nearly 16%, are without retirement plans. And of course, this is a huge problem because those people who are retiring without any kind of retirement plan means that they need to be supported in other ways. Going on to the next page, we're going to switch topics here. We're going to talk about inflation here, which has an impact on the middle class and those in poverty, as our inflation has risen over the years. And this tracks it from 1965 or thereabouts to 2010, and today is up there at 237, meaning that if I think the price index we look at is at 100, starting in 1965, it would have been at 31.5, and today it's at 237. So that just shows you a steady increase in inflation during all of these years. And bottom line is that a bag of groceries purchased in 1964 cost about $3, and now it's $23. And I recall very vividly that when I was back in the 60s, mid-60s, when I got married, and we started having kids in the late 60s, and when they were growing, especially as teenagers, I would go to the grocery store, and I could count on average a bag of groceries in the 1970s being at $10 a bag, and now it's substantially more than that. So that's how you know the impact of inflation is on your family. Going on to the next graphic here. Jim, I think this is on your side.
Yeah, it is. I'm coming right back. The next chart here, we think that about 80 to 90% of the problems in families making a living are due to the structure of the economy and the way the economy is organized, the rules under which the economy operates, et cetera. Nevertheless, when we look at personal behavior and personal responsibility, this is something we want to factor in. But in our opinion, way too much attention is paid to this. It's your fault if you're not making it. You should have got a PhD in computer engineering and gotten a good job, et cetera. Whereas a society has to organize itself so the great mass of people have some way to make a living. The only way to do that now, particularly in a household with children, is to have two incomes. Alan and I have looked at this in some detail. People do not have to be married in the historic traditional sense. It doesn't make any particular difference whether people are married or not, whether they're related or not, whether they're straight or gay or whatever. But if you've got a household with kids, you've really got to have two incomes in that household for the most part. A few high-end professionals can make it with one income and one adult, but in most cases, you've got to have two incomes. We've been looking into family planning. This is going to be a big controversy at the national level because of abortion, but the spacing of children is something important, and the long-acting reversible contraceptives seem to be a way to give people much greater control over child arrival. So this is something that there's opportunities for improvement. Colorado is doing some very interesting experiments providing long-acting reversible contraceptives to anybody that wants them, and it's reduced unplanned pregnancies and abortions both. So there's something there. There are other issues around addiction, for example. We're trying to sort through that. See that one of our mistakes in community action was sort of the Maslow hierarchy of needs mistake. The idea that first you have to get rid of your addiction and then you can go to work. Well, there's about 11 million drug addicts in the U.S. and about 9 million of them get up and go to work every day. There's 40 million alcoholics, about 35 million of them get up and go to work every day, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not, it's a factor, and in some cases, the drug and alcohol addiction is an element of people not being able to work, But in many, many other cases, in the majority of cases, this is not a reason why people can't work and earn a living. So we want to try to unravel that a little bit. So there are other factors in terms of personal behavior and personal responsibility, and we're going to try to address those only because we think while they are important in some cases for some people, they are 10 to 20% of the reason that families can't make a living. The other 80% are in the structure of the labor market, corporate practices, and governmental failure. So that's what we want to try to emphasize in this learning group. Now, I want to figure out, Alan, we're going to run out of time here. Let's jump forward to, where are we? We're at 44. Let's jump forward and look at, I think in order to get in our conversation about this, let's jump forward to slide 52. We're going to come back to some of these other topics in the course of this work group. Alan, you want to talk about this? This is one of your fabulous finds and was one of the bases for your blog, The Declining Middle Class.
Most important here is that we've gotten to the point now in the structure of income in our percentiles where the middle class has been squeezed so hard that the Pew Family Research Organization has determined that we've now hit the tipping point that as of this year, 2016, less than 50% of the United States income population is no longer middle class. They have fallen below that line that separates middle class from trending towards poverty. And here we note that 40% of Americans between the ages of 25 and 60 will experience at least 1 year below the official poverty line. And that's $23,492 for a family of 4. That's 40% of the American population. 54% will spend a year in poverty near the poverty line or below 100%, below 150%. If related conditions like welfare use, near poverty, and unemployment are added, 4 out of 5 Americans will encounter one or more of these events. Half of all American children will at some point during their childhood reside in a household that uses food stamps for a period of time. Now think about that. This has serious implications all the way around, where we thought that the middle class could be self-sustaining for a lifetime. No longer is that possible. And the graphic, which is from the Wall Street Journal, one of the most conservative publications in the United States, shows where the trends have been between 1983 and 2010. So keep that in mind as you develop your strategy of fighting poverty in your community. Here we talk about mobility. The next couple of slides deal with mobility, and that's a major outcome of people falling into poverty, because then it gets to be even harder for them to climb out of it and become middle class. And as you can see, according to a survey from Oxfam, 70% of the middle class are falling out of the middle class and falling into a lower income. And so only out of 100%, 12% think that they might be able to rise into the middle class. And this is a survey from Oxfam.
So let me talk a little bit about that. The concept used to be in America that, oh, anybody can make it, anybody can move up, et cetera, and America has the highest rate of opportunity in the world, et cetera. Well, it turns out that if you're in the born in the bottom 20% of America, odds are excellent you're going to stay there. In other words, social mobility is a lot stickier than it used to be, depending on where you start. And the basis for your moving up is largely a function of inherited family wealth as opposed to what you're going to earn in the labor market. So that previous two slides are consistent with the finding here that there's a huge amount of volatility and over time, not so much in a given year, but over time, a lot of people move into poverty and a lot of people move out of poverty. But it's a process that is only roughly understood, and we're going to try to spend more time looking into these dynamics and flows. The panel studies on income dynamics, for example, found that men 35 to 55, 30% of them will experience at least a 3-month period out of the workforce due to health-related issues. And for most people, if the man is out for 3 months, that household is in trouble financially. And if he does not have health insurance, which looks like it's going to be coming at us that way again, is even in more trouble. Let's go on and talk about, going up to slide 56, Alan, let's talk about the project. Skip past, there we go. So if you look at this information that we presented today, there's about 40 elements here that we think can be used to describe the employment situation in your community. Number of people working part-time, we say we're working full-time, number of people who've dropped out of the labor market, number of people working full-time but still in poverty. So it's this kind of detailed information that we want to try to help you construct for your community. Whether you do this as part of your community assessment process, whether you do it as part of a special study, or whether you're just interested in 1 or 2 of these data elements because they relate to some particular program you're operating. What we want to try to do over the course of the next year is provide more tools to you to figure out how to find those data on your particular community so that you better understand what's happening out there. And, in our opinion, see that a lot of the reason that people can't make a living has to do with the characteristics of the labor market and not because of their personal willingness to work or desire to make a living. So we're going to put out, when you sign up for this through the partnership, because of the nature of these learning communities and the contract that the partnership has with OCS, they want you to fill out this little application. Everybody's in. You just got to do the paperwork through Hyacinth in order to get on the list. And then once you're on the list, you will start getting information from Alan and me about how to do the analysis on your community. Now, here's another wrinkle on this project. Much of the many CAAs are organized on the basis of counties. You've got X number of counties in your community action agency area. But the way the global economy is organized is the global economy connects with regional economic clusters. There are about 173 of these regional economic clusters in the United States. They do not correspond the county boundaries in a very neat way. So you've got these regional economic clusters that are actually the interface between the global economy and whatever is happening in your area, particularly with anything to do with natural resources, agriculture, mining, timber, et cetera, et cetera. And we're also going to provide you some tools and templates for analyzing your regional economy. Some of this information is available from your economic development people, from university extension, but you've got to understand not just your local economy, what's happening in your CAA area, but in the region in which you are located, because it's the regional economies that are the primary interactors and conduits for connecting to the global economy. So we're going to be providing some tools along those lines as well. So we encourage you to sign up for this. We will send you stuff. Obviously, this is voluntary. If you want to react to the material or use it, that's fine. Anything you don't find useful, you just don't use. Anything you do find useful and want to burrow in on it, like the number of 1099 workers in your area versus the number of W-2 workers, et cetera, we would very much like to hear back from you about your success in obtaining that information. So once again, we are looking we'd like to have 20 or 30 CAAs that want to participate with us on over the course of the next year. We're going to have a gathering of the people who are interested in January at the MLTC to talk more about this. If any of you are coming, be sure to come to the workshop that we do on this topic in January, but we'll be doing other webinars over the course of the coming year on this topic as well. But the key to making this useful to you is for you to take this generic trend, number of people working part-time who wish they were working part-time, working full-time, and figure out the number of people in your area. And then we can start talking about strategies to help correct that situation by changing the rules under which the economy operates. So, Alan, would you like to add anything else to what we're going to do in the project?
No, but stay tuned. We're going to be offering a number of future webinars, as Jim said, and look for us in Long Beach at the winter conference, and we'll probably see you in Philadelphia at the annual conference in late August.
Okay. Good. Hyacinth, you've got some more slides here that you're going to talk about the additional elements of the learning community.
I'm sorry, Alan. Could you repeat your question? I mean, Jim,
no, I was
sorry.
just saying that, Alan just pointed out that we'll be in Long Beach and hope to see people there, and we'll probably be at the Philadelphia conference, and we're going to be doing some additional webinars, but we are looking for local people, 20 to 30 CAAs who sign up for this new group with whom we can interact on a more intensive basis individually if necessary to assist them in teasing out this information from their local areas. So we're pretty much finished with our section. The next slide here has got some additional resources on what we're doing, our blog slide. There we go. Alan has this terrific blog he's been doing for about 3 years, Decline of the U.S. Middle Class, America's New Working Poor. You can click on any of these hot links and it'll take you up there. He's got over 100 entries on some of these specific topics. So Hyacinth, you were going to talk more about the national webinar series as we wrap up here.
Right. So actually, we did have a couple of questions in if you would be interested in answering them. We had a couple of questions about some of the data that you shared before we go into our upcoming webinar.
Sure.
Great. So the first question that we had, you talked a lot about general trends, and we were wondering, one of the attendees was wondering if you had any specific stats or could point to resources that could speak about economic and trade indicators or trends that specifically impact farmers and people in rural America.
Yes, and if you look on each of the slides, we try to put a hot link to the source of information there. Again, these are national trends, and as we get into working with individual CAAs, we want to burrow down with data from state agencies, extension division, et cetera, and look specifically at these trends in rural areas. We think these trends are actually exaggerated in some rural areas about the number of jobs that are being created. They're only part-time jobs as opposed to full-time jobs. So we have some information on that that's available through the hot links. When you look at one of our slides that has the national trend, you click on it, go to that source, and then some of them have breakdowns by state or urban, rural, et cetera. But this is definitely something we want to focus more on.
If I can add to that, Hyacinth, you may have noticed that we sent with the slide presentation a reader for session 5, and it has all of the major hot links to data sources that I hope all the participants will receive as a part of this presentation. They can go to that reader. It's one-page long, and it has many of the sources that we used here, and those sources in turn can give them additional information as to how to get information at their local level, data at their local level. I don't know if you saw that reader or not. Reader for session 5.
It was attached to the, it was attached to the PowerPoint that we sent. Hyacinth, if you could get that and email it out to the people who registered for this, that would be helpful.
Yep, you're one step ahead of me. And for those of you that are still on, in that follow-up email that I mentioned earlier, that's going to be going out with the links to the recording. In addition to the slides that were presented today, we're going to have all of the resources that were shared in that reader that you guys sent out. So if you're interested in learning more about specific segments of your community or how these economic trends have impacted certain segments of the population, definitely be chock full of information. So please keep a lookout for that. Everyone who registered for today's event will receive that. So I do want to be mindful of everyone's time because we have run a little bit over, but I do want to sincerely thank our presenters, Jim and Alan, for their time today and all of the resources and information that you shared with us going forward. I'm going to quickly turn it over to Tiffany Marley if she wanted to just share a few words.
Yeah, and so thank you, Alan and Jim, and we just can't express enough to the members of this group for how much we appreciate your time and effort, and we'll just continue down this path of being an informed network so that at the end of the day, we might uproot both the causes and conditions of poverty. So we look forward to hearing from you as you sign up for the affinity group, and certainly if there's anything that we can do for you here at the partnership, feel free to reach out to Zandy, Hyacinth, or myself. Thank you, and make it a great day.
Great. Thank you very much, Tiffany. So very quickly, I just want to make you all aware of some of our upcoming events. If you're interested in attending any of our upcoming webinar events, we have one scheduled for next Friday, which is about the importance of trauma-informed approaches to two-generation programs. If you click on the link on your screen, you'll actually be able to directly register for that webinar event. We hope that you'll join us for that. Another event that we have coming up later this month that we are very excited about is a part of our racial equity initiative, and it's going to be about understanding racial bias and its impact. We're very excited to have one of our presenters talk about a book that he wrote, and it's going to be a very interesting and hopefully enlightening experience. So again, if that's of interest to you or your organization, please register for this event. We also have another upcoming webinar event scheduled for January 5th. which is going to be about learning with the learning community. So if you liked what you heard today, we hope that you'll join us for that event where we'll talk more in detail about the learning community in general and the different ways that your organizations and state associations can take part in the learning community. So please be sure to register for that event. We hope to see many of you there. We always appreciate your feedback. If you have a few moments, please fill out the survey to let us know how we're doing with this webinar event. And with that, here's the contact information for the LCRC team. If you have any questions about anything that occurred today or the learning community in general, please feel free to reach out to any of us. And with that, that will conclude our presentation for today. Thank you all for attending.
Thank you, Addison.
Thank you. Participants, send us questions.